Hello, everyone. Session 12 partook in person, was sort of an extended session that we weren't able to record, so this is going to be kind of a recap going over it so that everyone's on the same page for the story going ahead. So, without further ado, let's roll on into it. The party ended up staying within the church for the evening to watch over Monsignor after curing him of the poison, just to make sure that nothing was going to happen to him going forward. In the morning, they ended up returning to the Verdant Vale and bumped into a dirty blonde elvish man in a suit named Remy Venstro. He used to be the head advisor for the political family, but has since retired due to an illness. They feel feverish heat coming off from Remy. He says he goes to the theater and he does that every day to enjoy his retirement. During this time, Drake broke off to the apothecary for materials for spell components, bumping into a swamp witch doctor named Dr. Tillier. Sort of like Dr. Facilier from Princess and the Frog, but Dr. Tillier noted Drake being a little bit different and struck conversation with him, trying to pry into his motives and reasons for being in the apothecary and in Seraphim in general. Tried to sort of dodge that conversation before breaking away back to the party in the Verdant Vale. After that little encounter, the party follows behind Remy, who is heading to the theater, and Drake casts Disguise Self, turning himself into his female persona, Dracona, which he then used to follow Remy inside the theater and get a seat himself. They note that Remy sits in the mezzanine, while half of the party is watching the front entrance to the theater, and the other half of the party is watching the back end, just to make sure that nobody is kind of coming in or out unseen that they didn't know of. Drake watches the performance of the theater, which is very burlesque and Broadway style, led by a darker-skinned elvish man. Seems to be very theatrical, being Banji. The rest of the group from the back ended up sneaking in through the backstage entrance after the performances were finished, a lot of the people exiting, and Drake able to relay that there was an extra individual that they did not see come out the back. They ended up coming inside to meet him, which he introduced himself as Banji. Banji immediately started reprising his own roles of song and dance, and also the menacing entity of the Promised End. The party checks him out, and he seems to not know who the Promised End really is and what they're actually doing. He just believes it's a role that he is partaking in a very menacing way. They note that Banji seems to be living behind the stage and is grilling some meats and desserts and drinking and having a grand time that is sort of supplied to him from these people that helped him get the role as the Promised End. Banji will note that there is a film crew that typically works with him during some of the recordings, and there is one individual who helms the effects, and he is always wearing a cloak. One that the party will later note is the same cloaked individual from the Black Ops warehouse. The crew ends up persuading Banji to meet his lone fan sitting up in the mezzanine. After the performance was completed, they saw that he was still sitting up there, to which Banji was excited, seeing this person here pretty much every day. They head up there, and Remy ends up asking Banji for an autograph, which he excitedly does. Dan also asked for an autograph, made out to his name, Don Shula, at least in this case his alias. The party notes that it's getting closer to about the 24-hour mark that the poison would have initially taken effect, and head back to the church to ensure that the Promised End does not show up. They hide Monsignor and use Silent Image in his place. When the 24-hour mark hits, they notice that the window behind Monsignor, denoted in this picture, is blown open suddenly, stirring up dust and sand within the church, which allows a quick visage of what the creature actually is, which was previously invisible, but able to be made out through the sand and dust. The party noted it as an invisible stalker, and as soon as the poison would have taken effect, the invisible stalker flees into the distance. An announcement comes over, a thaumaturgic booming with a cloud-right face carved into the sky. The Promised End makes an announcement saying, Monsignor is worthy of living, since he has overcome his power. and then announces his next target is Miri Amore, the wife to the political leader, Marchand Amore. The party slides back to the theater quickly and sees the filming crew leaving for the day, and a certain individual in the distance wearing the same cloak from the Black Operations warehouse flickers into a flash of fire, disappearing without a trace. The party questions Banji some more, who proves unhelpful before heading to the political family within the Capitol building. The crew notices off the edge of the town where the bog meets the forest is the same witch doctor, Dr. Tillier, standing and watching them before sinking into the mire below his feet. The party heads inside the Capitol building and meets the political family, the Amores, consisting of a family of elves of different shapes and sizes. Elaine is an 8-year-old boy with black hair and roughly put together tavern-style clothes. Miri is a brunette, elvish homemaker kind of wife. And Marchand, a very powerful war-torn general or commander that has a eye patch and a handlebar mustache. The family has been in charge for a long time, since before the Forgetting, roughly over 100 years ago now. They end up curing Miri after some persuasion with the Amores, and they help with Monsignor, who is in tow. And note that within some of this immediate area of this grand hall within the Capitol building, they see pictures of different advisors and some new paintings detailing the family that look to have been touched recently or doctored up recently. Some of the pictures they note have pictures of Remy Vanstro standing with the family, almost in a more cordial and close manner, like they could have been family themselves. The party ends up noting that they saw him today, and he said he retired due to an illness, which Marchand said was false. He was fired due to policy differences that they couldn't overcome, some of which were fairly radical. However, Marchand didn't believe he could be capable of these acts of terrorism as the promise end. Marchand ends up recognizing Dan, as he knows pretty much everybody who's lived in Seraphim at one point or another. And he says, aside from the crew, he was here 10 years ago, he believes, and he left. And he wanted to know if Dan wanted to make conversations with someone that he is familiar with in the dungeon named Terzo. The invisible stalker, seemingly watching the curing that had happened moments ago, flees the scene. Another announcement is made shortly after, noting Don Shula as the next victim, and he has 1 hour to live, since the Promise End's powers have grown even stronger during the time. Dan agrees to Marchand that now is the time to make amends, and he will head to the basement to talk with Terzo. And while in this dark-lit dungeon, with one torchlight in Terzo's cell, Terzo eventually recognizes Dan, calling him Nerdstradamus, which Nostradamus is Dan's true name. Terzo states he didn't do anything, especially murdering someone, apologizes to Dan for being a terrible person after being locked up for 10 years, and was on to something about the political family, and that's why he's being used as the scapegoat. Dan notices something in the room is watching them. One of the shadows has an eyeball in the corner of the room watching their conversation before it flickers out and disappears with its blink. Dan says that he will get Terzo out of there, since he believes that he did not commit the murder or stabbing 10 years ago. As Dan turns to leave the dungeon, the lone torch lighting the cell for Terzo flickers out. They wait out the 1 hour before Dan starts to feel warm, and then eventually feeling a flash of heat within, knocking him unconscious. The invisible stalker and Remy, the true promised end, show up, with Remy being surrounded by fire and red energy. Combat breaks out, and is close, with multiple people going down and even Dan dying at one point, before Monsignor could cast Revivify with his one lone diamond he has on him. They eventually defeat Remy before his lingering will carries out, and fills the invisible stalker with his flames. The invisible stalker is no longer invisible, but has new fire-based abilities such as a vortex it can shoot out in a line, and whenever it is hit, it deals fire damage to the attacker. They eventually take out the mutated stalker and put this story to rest. Marchand congratulates them and thanks them for their help, giving them each 1,000 gold pieces. Marchand asks them if they'd be willing to look into something pretty dire in the swamp. Elves, adventurers, explorers, and travelers are going missing near Elarath, an ancient elvish city built in the treetops, now inhabited by smugglers, thieves, and kidnappers. They agree that they will investigate it and head back to the boat with Monsignor in tow, where they note that Phoenix Boy is roughly 18 years old and is now holding a bow on his back. He says, "When are we heading now?" Monsignor ends up accompanying the party as they are going to save the Goodberry. The session ends and the party hits level 5. See you next week.